So we're back once again, and today we're going to be covering the German battleship line. Partially because it's one of the few lines I've completed, and also due to the fact that they're probably one of the most important lines in the game, both as a part of the actual game and historically. So without further ado, let's get into it and start, shall we? So we start this video at Tier 3, and at Tier 3 it's the NASSAU, the first in the line of the German battleships, and was actually the lead ship in the first line of dreadnoughts produced by the Kriegsmarine at the start of the 20th century. So what I thought I'd do was some of the pros and cons of the NASSAU. This could take as long as grinding through it, so jump at your NASSAU, click the battle button, and by the time you'll have finished your battle, I'll be finished my points and you'll be at Tier 4, and I'll be on to the next tier. So, let's go. The pros of the NASSAU include things like it having the fastest reload of any battleship at Tier 3, having the hallmark extremely tough German BB armor, which means that you have a greater chance of winning the lottery than actually citadeling it. Your secondaries, again, like most German BBs, have this really interesting habit of melting any light armored ship that gets too close, and you have the fact that the firing angles are actually pretty good on the NASSAU, which can't be said for other higher tier ships. KURFÜRST. So what would be positives without negatives? All things must be balanced, and in order to balance the NASSAU, it was bestowed with 1.8 Sigma, which you might think is a good thing, but the dispersion on this ship means you'll be hitting everything except for the target that you'll be aiming at. To add on to this, and starting a trend that will exist for the majority of the German BB line, the NASSAU is quite vulnerable to fires. Get used to me repeating that line a lot in this video because it's going to be extremely relevant for almost every ship of the line. Now, it isn't the fastest ship in the game either, and I could go on a 30-second rant about that, but it's Tier 3. So any ship that's capable of travelling faster than a rowing boat will get my pass. Oh, and one more thing, the range is quite poor, although it is better than the Kawachi, but that's like saying that freshly burned pie is better than that month-old open jar of pickles that's growing a colony of mould. Pretty pointless. Let's get moving along to Tier 4. At Tier 4 we bounce into the KAISER, and much like the last KAISER of Germany, Wilhelm II, I want to exile this ship to the region of never talking about it again after this. So with that out of the way, let's get down to discussing the KAISER. What can we say about the KAISER? Well, in real life this ship was actually pretty competitive. With good armour, decent guns, it wasn't a bad ship. So let's see how that compares to the in-game version, shall we? As usual, you do get the traditional extremely good German armour, and she is quite manoeuvrable, meaning you'll be able to turn your ship 180 degrees quicker than it takes Wargaming to produce another version of submarines. What is it, version 5 now? Anyways, she also has decent AA, but again, Tier 4, your AA may as well not exist for all the good it's going to truly do you. I could list a couple more positives about this ship, but I would just be placing the video in reverse, going back to the NASSAU, and copying and pasting them into this section of the video instead. So let's get on to some of the negatives instead. That's always more fun. Now, unlike the NASSAU, the KAISER has terrible firing angles, meaning one of the few times you'll actually be able to fire all 10 guns is when you're flat broadside, which is less than ideal, although with the level of armour on these ships and the ability for the enemy ships to aim correctly at this tier, does it really matter? No, it doesn't. To tie into this, the KAISER also has terrible turret traverse, meaning it's more likely that you could release a snail in New York and it would reach Los Angeles before your turrets actually traversed into a position where you could shoot something with them. Although you could just do what I do and swing the ship using its really good maneuverability in order to get the guns into position, although again, you'll be exposing your broadside, so results may vary. Oh, and one more thing, try to avoid getting hit by torpedoes. You may have torpedo bulges, but let's just say it's going to feel a lot more painful than you'd expect. Let's move along to Tier 5. And now we reach Tier 5, and at Tier 5 it brings us the KONIG. Let's go over some of the things, both good and bad, that make the KONIG unique. On the positive side, it does have a pretty speedy reload at around about 25 seconds. Although again, it has the traverse speed of someone who signed up for a 5k suddenly being thrust into the 100 meters at the Olympics, i.e. pretty goddamn slow relative to its competitors. It does have pretty good dispersion, which means you'll actually be able to hit some of the things you aim at in this ship, which isn't a luxury that you had in the previous ships of the line. You know, ships like the NASSAU and the KAISER, although when you do eventually manage to get your guns traversed and then aim them at an enemy battleship and hit them, you're likely not to do all that much damage because, well, the caliber isn't all that great on this ship, and fairly small relative to its competitors. Now, while on the KAISER you might be able to dodge some of those torpedoes headed your way, even if they do some insane damage, when they do hit, on the KONIG you're just not going to have that luxury due to the fact that the ship is fairly sluggish when trying to go around in a circle, and while the top speed might be pretty good. The acceleration, especially from a standing start, is articulately slow. But not to put the KONIG down too much, and perhaps to iterate my point from before, it is well armoured and has really good secondaries and is a viable battleship, so play it, you might enjoy it. I didn't, but then again I hate any ship below tier 8, so what do I know? Honestly, just ignore anything I say in this video and just do what you... On to tier 6 we go. And now we get to my personal favourite ship in this entire line, and it's none other than the BAYERN. The BAYERN was the last ship built by the German Imperial Navy, and oh boy did they go out with a bang. Although the bang usually came from the Allies shelling them and not from a celebratory firework. Now I know what you may be thinking, the BAYERN is a pretty forgettable average tier 6 BB. But when you look a little bit closer and rub off some of the dirt that usually is associated with the German BB line, you see a lot to be happy about. The armor belt on the BAYERN is fantastic, much better than the New Mexico and for sure a hell of a lot better than the Fuso, although the Fuso is more like a pinata than an actual armoured ship. Apart from the obviously good armour, you get very good guns to go along with it. She has a caliber similar to the Warships in the Queen Elizabeth, sitting at about 380mm. It also has fairly good shell velocity and has a very acceptable range, especially with Captain Perks and the spotting plane added on top, like a little bit of a cherry on top of a cake. Now, I might be painting a fairly skewed view of the BAYERN right now, so let me pull it back in line with some of the less than good things about the BAYERN. Well, for one thing, having all the guns in the world, which the BAYERN doesn't, it only has 8 guns, won't help you all that much if your accuracy is poor, and on the BAYERN it is. It's probably one of the worst for the tier, and when you combine this with the limited number of guns, then it's especially bad from range. To tie onto this, the reload isn't that great, which means you're going to be waiting quite a while in order to fire your salvos and miss. Again, especially if they're at range. So if there was one piece of advice I could give you playing this ship, stick close to the enemy, but obviously not too close, and stick to using AP. HE isn't going to be your best friend on this line, unless it's on the secondaries, which are actually pretty good on this ship, although that shouldn't come as much of a surprise, it is German after all, and it is a BB. Let's see what fresh hell awaits us at tier 7. Tier 7 says the GNEISENAU. Yeah, let's go with that. I'm probably going to butcher several more of these ships' names before the end of the video, so why not start at tier 7? The GNEISENAU is speedy, and with speedy ships you need to play it like you stole it. So you're going to be sitting at around 15 kilometers range, and easily doing small but consistent damage. You're also going to laugh if one of the enemy ships does try to get close to you, because you can just swing your ship right around and very quickly run away. Now that's not to say that you can never get close to an enemy BB, no of course not, and that would be very silly of me to say. I mean, you have torpedoes after all, and that fantastic German armour, so you can use it every so often. I just wouldn't make a habit of it, as habits tend to lead to addiction, and addiction sometimes lead to, well, death. And to tie on to that last point, the ship obviously does have torpedoes, but from what I see a lot of GNEISENAU players doing is getting into the game, getting up to full speed, and sailing as hard as they can straight towards the enemy BB, sitting 15 kilometers away. And while they might win that 1v1, they end up taking 30, 40, 50k damage while landing torpedoes. What this means is that you die very quickly thereafter. What you need to do is bide your time, keep safe and consistent, and keep doing damage from long range. And save the brawling for the end of the game, so that if you do get dropped relatively low, then it doesn't really matter because there'll be next to no ships left. Although based on some of the games lately, you'll probably be the last ship standing on your own team, rather than it being the other way around. Probably the biggest weakness of the GNEISENAU is its guns. It does have a 3x2 configuration, which meaning that your damage output may suffer as a result. Her armour is strong, and the risk of you getting citadeled, even from close range, is pretty minimal. Although that is a double-edged sword due to the fact that you're going to be eating a lot of full penetrations as a result of the excellent armour. If I were to sum up the GNEISENAU in its totality, then I would put it somewhere between a traditional battleship and a battlecruiser. It's fast, has a good reload, and most of all, it is tanky, so either playstyle is advisable. But I'm just a talking voice on your computer screen, so what do I know? Play it however you see fit. Let's move along to tier 8. At long last we hit the most popular, at least the most well-known of the German BBs, and it's none other than the BISMARCK. What to say about the BISMARCK? First of all, let me get my own personal biases out of the way so we can go for a more of a fair presentation of the ship. I hated this ship when I first started going through it. It was one of the most boring, inconsistent ships that I've ever played. Going to this thing from the GNEISENAU felt like going from driving a Ferrari all the way to a Fiat Punto. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's have a little bit more of an empirical look at things. On the plus side, I'm partying with a lot of her lower tier brothers. She does have a pretty good turret reverse, and decent reload time to go along with it, which means that you won't have to wait until you turn 80 in order to fire 2 salvos 180 degrees apart, like you did in some of the lower tier ships. Her secondary battery is definitely one of, if not the best thing about this ship. Her secondaries, if fully decked out, can reach 11 kilometers, which you just don't realise how punishing that is until you're on the receiving end of it, which suffice to say isn't all that fun, especially if you're sitting in a destroyer. And of course it does have a turtle bag, which I've probably said every single time about every single ship in this line, so why am I saying it again when I could probably be assumed at this point? Who knows? Let's get on to some of the negatives about this ship, and just to repeat myself one more time, the Bismarck is extremely vulnerable to fires. So again, using those secondaries to your advantage is obviously going to come with a downside, especially when you get that close, you're going to be set on fire. The HE on the Bismarck isn't great, so I'd probably just stick to using the AP. Just pretend it doesn't exist, or instead pretend that your secondaries are your actual HE, because they'll probably have a higher chance of starting a fire than anything coming out of your main battery labelled HE. Alright, so that's the Bismarck taken care of, so let's switch gears and head to the lofty heights of Tier 9 and discover the penultimate ship of the German line. I made that sound a lot more grandiose than I probably should have. Anyways, moving along. So I'm going to insert, once again, a little bit more of a personal opinion in here. Oh, and by the way, the ship is a Frederick the Grosse, in case anyone was wondering. In my opinion, this ship is a lot of fun to play. When I grinded through it, I enjoyed it a hell of a lot, even if you were the only Tier 9 ship being consistently put into Tier 10 battles, and very rarely being the top tier, but that's more of a game problem than a ship problem. Now, the one thing you're going to want to notice with the FTG, and I'm saying FTG instead of Frederick the Grosse because I don't want to butcher the name of the ship every time I say it, is that it's big. And although it does bring with it the fact that you're going to be fairly prone to fire, spontaneously igniting all over your ship as if it was made of newspaper doused in petrol, it does have an absolutely massive HP pool to soften the blow, sitting at around 84,300 HP, which I think might make it better than some tier 10s, although I could be wrong on that, so don't go bananas in the comment section if I am. The brawling is also extremely good on this ship, especially when you pair it with the fact that you get that enhanced hydro, which makes torpedoes so easy to dodge, because although you are a German tier 9 BB, your maneuverability and speed isn't all that bad. Although of course you're not going to be as nimble as a GROBER, it's still not that bad. Now, however, we must pair the good with the bad, and with a running theme of this entire line, the main guns aren't fantastic. I don't want to say they're completely trash because that would be truly unfair to this ship, but they do lack accuracy, and seeing as the majority of the time is probably going to be spent brawling, I suppose you're not going to care all that much, just so long as you can actually hit the enemy from 5 kilometers away. But I still think it's something to note, especially if you're going to be playing this ship like a traditional BB. Of course, there is a discussion between the 420s on the FDG and the 406s. Again, this came down to personal preference for me. The higher DPM with 406s, I find a bit more success with them, although the 420s can be useful in those brawling situations where DPM doesn't matter all that much and you just want to get one good salvo to finish someone off. So it comes down to personal preference, and at the risk of repeating myself for the third time, let's move on to the last and final ship of the line. So at long last, and after much struggle, we reach Tier 10, and Tier 10 brings us the grosse KURFÜRST, or the GK as it'll be known from here on out. The GK is probably one of the biggest ships in the game, and comes with some pretty big expectations on its shoulders, most of which it doesn't really live up to. Now, that is not to say that it is a bad ship, but like a lot of the ships that were released a relatively long time ago, they've been power crept just a little bit, and especially since the introduction of more and more fire spamming ships into the game, Smolensk, this makes it incredibly difficult to do what it needs to do over the course of a battle. So if you decide to play the GK, be prepared to take fire prevention, because it is probably the most required captain perk on this ship by far, as you'll be set on fire multiple times. Although if you ever do get in a position where you spot a nice little broadside all by yourself, then the GK is probably one of the best ships to take advantage of it. It packs around the same amount of AP power as a Montana, although it is much tankier to go along with it. I mentioned range just now, and how important it is to close the distance, and that's mostly because the range on this ship just isn't that good, especially when compared with other tier 10 BBs, where it ranks at the bottom. And when you join this with the fact that the ship is huge with large concealment, then it just makes it even harder to be accurate about which opportunities to take and which ones to avoid, because either way, you're going to be perma-spotted for the majority of the game. One more downside of this is that it has horrendous firing angles, which means that you're going to have to risk taking a lot of salvos to your broadside in order to fire all your main battery guns at once. Although this shouldn't matter that much, because again you do have that turtleback armor protecting you, but you will take a load of AP pen damage as a result. Again, mostly due to the power creep, this tier 10 is more meh than amazing, but it can be decent, and you can have some absolutely bananas games with the secondaries. I mean, just look on YouTube and search Crews of KURFÜRST for a start. God damn it, I thought I wasn't going to say that name again. But, to get back to the point, sadly you're going to have more dud games than bangers on this ship. Apologies in advance. So that pretty much sums it up for another video. I hope you enjoyed this one. Maybe you learned something, or maybe you just wasted your time watching this video and are now closer to death with nothing to show for it. Either way, I'll see you all in the next one.